Have you heard the phrase friction in the sales process? If you have heard that, you've probably heard it a lot. And if you haven't heard of that, I'll talk about what that means. But in this video, I'll talk about employee friction and why it's so important for organizations to think about friction in the employee process. And today, we'll talk about applicants. So, friction in the sales process. What that means is anything that makes it harder for a customer to buy for you. So, if your customer goes to your website and can't understand what you're doing, then they're probably going to move away. If your locations are hard to get to, or if your buying process is clunky, if you're trying to sell a software and you have procurement and legal that have a lot of hoops, customers may say, we'll work with someone more simple. So those things are often called friction in the sales process. And organizations spend a lot of time, money, effort, talking and thinking and strategizing around that friction and eliminating friction to make it easier for customers to buy from you and existing customers to increase their spend. But organizations don't always think about friction in the employee context. And what I mean by that, let's talk about friction in the applicant context. So in your organization, have you gone to your own careers page? No matter what your role is, you likely haven't gone there very often because careers pages often tend to be looked at by people outside the organization applying for jobs. And if you're in recruiting or HR, you may take an eye to it. But if you're in an organization, you probably don't look at it very often. And it's really important for the leaders of your organization to look at it and for everyone to look and say, does this actually reflect who we are as an organization? So in this video, I'll talk about what to do. So my challenge is to go right now to your organization's careers page and look and see and just take notes and say, is this what I see at our organization? You can look at my last video about organizational culture and how that can vary wildly between department and people's experience. So thinking about what are things that are on your careers page that really ring true for you, does that apply in other places your organization? But first look at your careers page and see, if I am a candidate, is it easy for me to understand what the organization is all about? And then if I actually want to apply. In going through that application process. Now, in the last episode of the HR Besties podcast, or recent episode, by the time you might see this video, in that episode, it's called New Year, Same You. And around the 32-minute mark of that episode, I'll put it in the show notes, I talk about this concept of friction in the sales process and how friction in the employee process is really important. And so my recommendation is for teams. If you're in HR, people operations, to look at that together and think about that process and how hard or easy it is for candidates to go through the application process. But start just like you would a candidate. Look at the careers page. Do I have a sense of what it stands for? But then as you go to apply, because a lot of organizations, my co-host Jamie talked about it in the podcast, they will make you upload your resume and then basically retype everything in your resume into the portal. And sometimes people will say, that's just our system, that's how it is. But when you think about friction, there are really good candidates that will take themselves out of that process because they'll think, I don't have the time. There's a million of people applying for this job anyway, so I'm not going to take the time to do this. So sometimes you may have systems that are making it that candidates are self-selecting out of your process because of those. And so it's thinking about what kind of technology you can invest in that can make it easy for people so that they can easily apply to your organization. And you can also get a sense of their background and get that in the easiest way possible. And so I think a lot of organizations, especially the leadership team, which is what I also recommend, separate from the people team, is those individuals that are not in people in HR, whether it's other C-suite leaders or directors, VPs, whatever that looks like, have people go to apply. And you might be surprised to see what that experience is like. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how long this takes, how many pages we have, or questions in the interview process. There's some organizations that will ask questions about different profiles, like, are you LGBTQ? And the reason for that may be to provide support to candidates. But also, when you ask those questions in the application process, there may be candidates that don't have a sense of, why are you asking that? That's super personal. And so if you have questions like that without any type of context whatsoever, again, organizations will decide whether or not they want to have questions like that. But you always want to provide why. Because when you ask those personal type questions, that's people's natural inquiry. Okay, why is that? And so that's something that your organization asks and you have reasons for that, explaining that and having those levels of support. But going through that and having that friction, again, because there are candidates that will go through that and feel like they're asking so many questions, so many personal questions. I also see organizations that will ask really out there questions sometimes. Like, what was your favorite book? And tell me what happens on your favorite page of your favorite book. Like, I've seen one pretty close to verbatim of that. And that type of thing, some organizations will have it so that people put effort into the interview process and you can get a sense of people's personalities. But questions like that, when you're asking that at the first glance and asking someone that's likely applying to a lot of different jobs, there may be people, especially within your organization, that say, what? Why are we asking that? And the question is, wherever you end up landing is, why are we asking? Why do we have things set up that way? And so that's my number one piece of or tip about friction in the employee process, especially in the application, is thinking at every step of the way of how could this impact candidates, making them more likely to want to work with us or less likely to work with us, and why do we have this in place? The same type of questions that you're likely going through for customers as they think about that buying process. What makes it easier to buy? What makes it harder to buy? Why do we have this? Ask those same things for the individuals that you're attracting to work at your organization. And then think about what you're going to do about that and what you can do about that. And that's why I say it can be important for the people team to have that, but the HR people team can often be an island. And so having that cross-functional look so that others in the organization have a sense of what you're asking, what your process is like, and really get behind having an investment, a time and energy investment to change any steps, do what it takes to make it easier while still making sure that you're having proactive language to talk about your organization and sell yourselves, and get really the critical information that you actually need from candidates to make sure that they have the qualifications to do the job and interest in the job, but doing that in a way recognizing that a lot of candidates are applying for a lot of different jobs. And so if you have too much of their time invested in it without any potential ever hearing back potentially from you, which I do think every organization should let candidates know whether they're selected for interview or not. But in the employee process, the applicant process, is just thinking about that. Think about your potential employees just like you think about those potential customers. So thinking about your processes, thinking about your job postings, what kind of language you have in there that attracts. So every step of that going through, whether it's starting on LinkedIn or starting internally on your career site, to look at different job postings and saying, would people have a sense of our organization? And then going through that process and every step of the way. What makes it easier? What makes it harder? What do I like? What do I have questions about? And getting others' input and then being able to answer the why. Taking that step is one that a lot of organizations just don't because they have so many things going on. But it can be really helpful to take that and make sure that you're being thoughtful and taking a second look. Because almost any job posting I've ever seen, even ones I've looked at, and I look back and think, oh, I would change that. Taking that second look and thinking fully about your process. That can help so that when individuals come aboard, they're talking about how great that application and interview experience was, as opposed to starting and feeling like it was the same old, same old. So that type of friction in the application process is the first that I'll talk about. I can talk about the interviews and also the employee experience and eliminating friction there. And feel free to drop anything in the comments. And as always, we love to see you here. And if you're ever looking for additional resources, there are plenty of videos on this channel that go in depth or have manager role plays. I also have a Manager 101 course and toolkit for organizations to run follow-up training. And I even have a job posting template that includes language to proactively talk about your organization and the role and set expectations to smooth that friction and make it more appealing for applicants to want to work at your organization.